You're in my spot, old-timer, and you're eating my rations. I suggest you move." Now, the voice, slick with the unearned confidence of youth and rank, cut through the low drone of the West Point field mess tent. The crowd of exhausted cadets, caked in a week's worth of mud and sweat, went quiet. A few nervous snickers rippled through the long tables. All eyes fell on the woman, the target of the insult. She was unassuming, a ghost in the machine of the Academy's grueling final field exercise. Her hair, pulled back in a severe, functional bun, was streaked with a premature silver that seemed to absorb the dim light. Wrinkles, like fine etchings on a map, radiated from the corners of her eyes, speaking of long years spent squinting in a sun far harsher than this one. She wore a simple, gray polo shirt and cargo pants, the anonymous uniform of a civilian contractor or a support staffer. She sat alone, her back straight, eating a standard MRE with a slow, methodical grace that seemed utterly out of place amidst the cadets' ravenous scarfing. She did not look up. She did not flinch. She simply brought another spoonful of rehydrated chili mac to her lips. Her calm as stone dropped into the churning water of the room. But General Wallace, observing from the shadows at the edge of the tent, saw something else. He saw the way she sat, not relaxed, but coiled, a perfect economy of posture that screamed discipline. He saw the slight, almost imperceptible can of her head, an observer's angle, taking in the entire room without ever turning. He saw her hands, not the soft hands of a bureaucrat, but the calloused, competent hands of a master craftsman. And as the cadet's mockery intensified, a cold certainty began to form in the old general's gut, a feeling he hadn't had since a dusty street in Kandahar when he'd mistaken a quiet goat herder for something he was not. If you believe that true respect is earned in silence and not demanded with noise, type competence in the comments below. For the young cadet captain in the center of the room, Marcus Thorne was about to learn a lesson that was not in any West Point textbook, a lesson written in the language of pure, terrifying, and absolute competence. He was about to poke the world's most dangerous hornet, mistaking it for a common housefly, and the entire base was about to bear witness to the shocking, humbling, and ultimately legendary consequences of his profound, arrogant miscalculation. He was a leader of cadets, a big fish in a very small, very structured pond, and he was about to discover the existence of oceans and the silent leviathans that swam in their depths. The woman, for her part, simply continued to eat, each movement a study in deliberate indifference, a silence more profound and more insulting to Thorne's ego than any retort could ever be. The silence in the tent stretched, becoming a tangible thing, a heavy blanket of anticipation. Cadet Captain Marcus Thorne, accustomed to being the center of attention and the primary source of noise, felt his face flush with a mixture of anger and embarrassment. Her lack of reaction was a public negation of his authority. In the rigid hierarchy of West Point, where every glance and gesture was a measure of dominance or submission, her placid refusal to acknowledge him was an act of rebellion. His cronies, a half-dozen cadets from his company, shifted their weight, their own smirks beginning to fade into uncertainty. They looked to Thorne, their leader, to reassert control. He took another step forward, his boots squelching softly in the mud-caked floorboards. "Did you hear me?" he said, his voice louder now, more condescending. He gestured with his chin towards her tray. "That's a steak and cheese MRE. The best one, reserved for company commanders. I'm a company commander. You," he looked her up and down with theatrical disdain, "are a civilian nobody, probably here to fix the water purifiers. So I'll say it again. Get up." The woman, Evelyn as she was known on her temporary contract paperwork, finished chewing her mouthful. She swallowed, a small, deliberate movement in her throat. Her eyes remained fixed on her meal. The air crackled. This was the critical moment, the point of no return in the unspoken social calculus of the barracks. Thor knew he had to escalate or lose face forever. He unholstered the training pistol from his hip. It was a standard-issue simunition handgun, its barrel a bright, non-threatening blue, but in the context of the room, it was a symbol of absolute power. The cadets around them sucked in a collective breath. This was crossing a line, even for Thorne. He thumbed the safety off with a loud, theatrical click that echoed in the sudden quiet. He leaned forward, the blue barrel of the weapon hovering just inches from her temple, pointed directly at her head. "I'm not asking anymore," he whispered, his voice a low, menacing hiss meant for her, but audible to the first few rows of tables. "Give me the food." It was a moment of pure, distilled arrogance. A boy, playing soldier with a toy gun, trying to intimidate a woman old enough to be his mother, all for a packet of processed food and a scrap of pride. He was performing, demonstrating his alpha status for the gallery of his peers. He expected fear. He expected her to flinch, to stammer an apology, to scurry away in humiliation. He expected to be the victor in this small, petty drama. What he did not expect, what he could never have conceived of in his narrow world of regulations and inherited privilege, was the abyss of experience that stared back at him from the placid surface of her silence. She didn't even blink. Her only reaction was to slowly, methodically, place her spoon down on the tray, the quiet click of plastic on plastic, a thunderclap in the charged atmosphere. Her hands rested, for a moment, on the table. And in that moment, the entire world was about to change for Marcus Thorne and everyone watching. An ear-splitting siren blared to life, its synthetic shriek ripping through the tent and shattering the tense tableau. Red lights pulsed, throwing the shocked faces of the cadets into stark, flickering relief. Code red. Code red. Active assailant on base. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill. A distorted voice boomed from the loudspeakers. For a split second, everyone froze. They had been running drills for weeks, but the tone of this voice, the raw panic bleeding through the distortion, was different. It was real. Chaos erupted. Cadets, trained for order, scrambled in a panic, overturning benches, shouting, their discipline vaporizing in the face of genuine fear. Thorne, who a moment ago had been the picture of command, was now just another frightened young man, his training pistol feeling like a useless toy in his hand. He barked orders that no one heard. "Form a perimeter. Spartan company on me." But his voice was swallowed by the bedlam. Through the open flap of the tent, they could see it. Two figures clad in black tactical gear, moving with a predatory grace that was utterly alien to the academy's environment. They weren't cadets playing a role. They were professionals. They moved in short, coordinated bursts, neutralizing the perimeter guards with brutal efficiency, their movements a blur of violence. These were the aggressors for the exercise, instructors from a 75th Ranger Regiment brought in to provide a realistic opposition force. But they weren't following the script. They were supposed to test the outer defenses, not storm the command and control tent. Something was wrong. They were moving too fast, too hard. The first of the black-clad instructors burst into the mess tent. He was a mountain of a man, his face obscured by a helmet and goggles. He raised his rifle, also a simunition weapon, but far more intimidating, and fired a 3-round burst into the ceiling. The popping sounds were like cannon fire in the enclosed space. Cadets screamed and dove for cover. The instructor shouted, "Everyone on the floor, now!" Thorne, caught in the open, raised his own pistol, his hand trembling. He was the commander. He had to do something. He aimed at the center mass of the instructor and pulled the trigger. Click! Nothing. His weapon, he realized with a sickening lurch in his stomach, was empty. He had used his few simunition rounds earlier in the day on a target range and, in his arrogance, had never bothered to reload. The instructor's head snapped towards him, the dark lenses of his goggles fixing on Thorne like a predator spotting its prey. The instructor laughed, a harsh, dismissive sound. "You're first, Captain," he sneered, raising his rifle. It was in this precise moment of frozen terror, with Thorne facing his own public failure and humiliation on a scale he could never have imagined, that the woman moved. She didn't rise from her chair in a rush. It was more like she unfolded. One moment, she was the quiet, unassuming contractor. The next, she was a study in kinetic potential. Her previous stillness was not passivity. It was a state of perfect, patient observation. And now, she had observed enough. The black-clad instructor, his attention locked on the pathetic, disarmed cadet Captain Thorne, never saw her coming. He registered her movement only as a peripheral blur, a flicker of gray in his vision. It was his last conscious thought. Her right hand, the one that had been resting calmly on the table, shot out. It did not grab for his rifle. It did not push. It moved with the precise, surgical grace of a striking snake. Her fingers, strong and sure, found the exact point on the rifle's retention sling, just below his collarbone. She didn't pull the weapon away. She used his own forward momentum against him, driving the sling carabiner deep into the soft tissue of his neck. At the same time, her left hand came up, not as a fist, but as a rigid blade. The heel of her palm connected with the base of his chin, snapping his head back with a sickening crack of vertebrae. The instructor, a seasoned ranger who had seen combat in 3 different countries, went down like a sack of stones, his rifle clattering to the floor. The entire sequence took less than a second. It was not a brawl. It was an equation. It was physics and anatomy applied with a terrifying, silent competence. Before the first instructor's body had even settled, she was already moving towards the second, who was just entering the tent. He saw his partner fall and raised his own rifle, shouting a curse. He was faster than the first. He got his weapon level, but she was no longer there. She had dropped low, scooping up the fallen instructor's rifle in a single, fluid motion. She didn't shoulder it. She didn't aim. Rising from her crouch, she fired from the hip. Pop, pop, pop. 3 rounds. 3 perfect shots. The first struck the second instructor's rifle, knocking it from his grasp. The second hit the exposed microphone on his helmet, shattering it. The third, a demonstration of impossible precision, hit the tiny, insignificant release buckle on his chin strap, sending his helmet flying off his head. The instructor, a master sergeant with 15 years in special operations, stood there disarmed and metaphorically naked, his mouth agape in pure, unadulterated shock. The tent, which seconds before had been a symphony of chaos, fell into a profound, deafening silence. The only sound was the gentle hum of the generator outside and the distant, fading wail of the alarm. Every single cadet, Thorne included, was frozen, their eyes wide with a mixture of awe and terror. They stared at the woman. She stood in the center of the room, the captured rifle held loosely in one hand, her breathing slow and even. Her expression had not changed. It was the same calm, unreadable mask it had been when Thorne had pointed a gun at her head. She had just dismantled 2 elite ranger instructors in the time it took to draw a breath, and she looked as if she had just finished buttering a piece of toast. The silence was her validation. The shock was her applause. In that moment, she was no longer a civilian contractor. She was a force of nature. Into this cathedral of stunned silence walked General Ivan Wallace. He didn't rush. His steps were measured, authoritative, the sound of his polished boots on the grimy floorboards the only movement in a world that had ground to a halt. The cadets, seeing the 2 stars on his collar, instinctively tried to straighten up, to remember their training, but their bodies were still locked in awe. The general's eyes, sharp and intelligent, swept the scene. He took in the 2 ranger instructors, one on the floor nursing his neck, the other standing bareheaded and bewildered. He saw the captured rifle in the woman's hand. He saw the look of shattered reality on Cadet Captain Thorne's face. He saw it all, and a slow, deep understanding bloomed in his chest. He walked past Thorne without a glance. He walked past the cadets, who seemed to shrink in his presence. He stopped directly in front of the woman, maintaining a respectful distance of 5 feet. The 2 ranger instructors, recognizing the general, snapped to a painful attention. The one on the floor, grimacing, managed to get to his knees. "General, sir," the standing one stammered. "Unscheduled. Variable." General Wallace held up a single hand, and the instructor fell silent. The general's gaze was fixed entirely on the woman. He didn't look at her as a subordinate, or as a civilian. He looked at her the way a master craftsman looks at the work of another, with a deep and profound respect. There was a flicker of recognition in his eyes, a memory struggling to surface. The stance, the economy of motion, the absolute calm after the storm. He had seen it before, years ago, in a classified briefing about a hostage rescue operation, so sensitive it was officially denied. They had shown a grainy video, a ghost of a figure moving through a room, a ballet of violence that was over in 3 seconds. They called the operator Spectre. He looked back at the woman, at the streaks of gray in her hair, at the lines of experience on her face. He pulled a hardened datapad from a pouch on his vest. His fingers, surprisingly nimble for a man his age, flew across the screen. He accessed the secure personnel database for the Academy. He typed in the name from her contractor badge, Evelyn Reed. The file that came up was thin. A shell, basic information, social security number, a low-level security clearance for her work with the Academy's infrastructure logistics. It was a cover. Wallace knew it. He swiped his own thumbprint across a scanner on the side of the datapad, then entered a 12-digit code. He was accessing a different system now, a server so deep and so dark that its existence was a state secret. He typed the name in again, Evelyn Reed. The system responded, alias not found. Cross-referencing biometrics a second later, a new file loaded onto the screen. It was not thin. It was a digital tomb, heavy with the weight of a secret history. And as General Wallace began to read, his face, already stern, hardened into a mask of pure, unadulterated reverence. The screen of the datapad glowed, its light reflecting in the general's wide eyes. The file was designated with a symbol, not a name, a black delta superimposed over a cross-trident and sword. Tier 1, the best of the best of the best. He didn't need to read the unit name. He knew. He scrolled down, his thumb moving slowly, as if tracing the lines of a sacred text. The narrator's voice, in the minds of all who would later hear this story, would list her accomplishments like a drumbeat, each one a blow against the anvil of assumption. Record states, 22 years of active service. Record states, founding member and lead strategist of a special missions unit so secret, its budget is buried in non-military agricultural grants. Record states, over 4,000 hours of documented combat operations in 17 hostile countries, most of which the nation was not officially at war with. Record states, recipient of the Distinguished Service Cross, 3 Silver Stars, and a decoration so classified it was listed only as the Presidential Cipher, awarded in a closed-door ceremony for an action that prevented a global catastrophe. Record states, Master Instructor certification in every known form of armed and unarmed combat, from Krav Maga to Systema, from precision long-range marksmanship to close-quarters battle. Her specialty was listed in cold, technical language, infiltration and regime destabilization. Solo, the cadets, still frozen, could not see the screen, but they could see the general's face. They saw his expression shift from stern authority to something far deeper. It was the look a devout priest gives to a holy relic. He scrolled to the bottom of the file and saw her current status, active reserve, category 0, on detached assignment for threat assessment analysis of command infrastructure at the United States Military Academy. She wasn't here to fix the water purifiers. She was here to test them, to test their leaders, their systems, their readiness. She was the test, and they had failed. General Wallace slowly looked up from the datapad. His eyes met hers. He didn't see Evelyn Reed, the quiet contractor. He saw the living legend from a file. He saw Spectre. He drew himself up to his full height, his back ramrod straight, in a move that sent a shockwave of disbelief through every cadet in the room. He brought his hand up in a sharp, perfect salute. It was not the casual salute an officer gives a subordinate. It was the salute of a soldier to a superior. It was the salute of a warrior acknowledging a master. Ma'am, his voice was a low rumble of pure respect, echoing in the cavernous silence. My apologies. I was not aware you were on site. He then turned his head, his eyes, now like chips of granite, fixing on Marcus Thorne. Cadet Captain Thorne, he said, his voice dropping 10 degrees. You pointed a weapon, training or not, at a command-level strategic asset of the United States military. You did so to intimidate her. You did so for a packet of food. You have not only failed as a leader, you have failed as a soldier. You confused rank with respect. You confused silence with weakness. You have brought shame upon this uniform, this academy, and a legacy of every soldier who has ever died because of the arrogant assumptions of a clueless officer. The general's words hung in the air, each one a hammer blow to Marcus Thorne's world. The shame was a physical thing, a hot, creeping flush that started at his neck and spread across his entire body. He could feel 100 pairs of eyes on him, not with the grudging respect or fear he usually commanded, but with a new, searing mixture of pity and contempt. His universe, once so certain and clearly defined, had been utterly inverted. The bottom of the hierarchy was the top. The nobody was the most significant person on the entire base. His act of dominance was now exposed for what it was, the pathetic posturing of a child. The story of that moment, of the general salute, would not spread like wildfire. It would detonate. Within the hour, it was the only topic of conversation in the barracks, the command centers, and the instructor-ready rooms. The two ranger instructors, after being medically cleared, spoke of her in hushed, reverent tones. It wasn't a fight, the master sergeant explained to his own commander, his voice full of a strange awe. It was like being corrected by gravity. I've been in knife fights in back alleys in Baghdad. I've been in firefights where I couldn't hear myself think. I have never, ever felt so completely and utterly outclassed. The security footage from the mess tent was immediately classified at the highest level, but not before a dozen junior officers and NCOs had seen it. They described it to others, the legend growing with each telling. They talked about the way she moved, like water flowing around a rock. They talked about the impossible precision of her shots. They talked about the deafening silence that followed. The cadets of Spartan Company, Thorne's own unit, distanced themselves from him. They avoided his gaze. Their loyalty, once his most prized possession, had evaporated. He was no longer a leader to be emulated. He was a cautionary tale. He ate his meals alone, the irony not lost on him. He had tried to take one person's food and had ended up isolated from everyone. The incident was given a name, as such events always are in the military. They called it the Spectre's lunch. The corner table where she had sat became an unofficial shrine. No one dared to sit there. Cadets would walk by and glance at it, a silent reminder of the day's lesson, a lesson in humility, a lesson in the vast, hidden depths of the people around them, a lesson in the profound difference between authority and power. Thorne had authority, given to him by his rank. The woman, they now understood, possessed a power that was innate, earned in crucibles he could not even imagine. And in the quiet solitude of his own disgrace, Thorne began to understand. His arrogance had been a shield, protecting a fragile, untested core. She had not just disarmed an instructor. She had disarmed him, stripping him of his pride, his status, and his self-deception, leaving him with nothing but the cold, hard truth of his own inadequacy. Thorne's days became a study in isolation. He went through the motions of the field exercise, his commands now hollow, his authority a ghost. The other cadets followed his orders, but it was out of duty, not respect. The spark was gone. He was haunted by the memory of her calm, the absolute stillness in her eyes as he threatened her. It wasn't contempt. It wasn't anger. It was a complete and total absence of consideration, as if he were nothing more than a buzzing insect, a minor annoyance in her otherwise ordered world. He knew he had to find her, not because he was ordered to, but because some fundamental part of him, the part that still wanted to be a good soldier, knew that his education at this academy would be incomplete without it. It took him 2 days. He asked his tactical officer, who stonewalled him. He tried to find her through the civilian contractor liaison, who claimed her contract had been terminated. He was being blocked. They were protecting her from him, and the shame of that burned even deeper. Finally, on the last night of the exercise, he found her, not in a command tent or an office, but in a vehicle maintenance bay alone. She was cleaning the rifle she had taken from the ranger instructor. She wasn't using a standard-issue cleaning kit. She had a small, leather roll of specialized tools, and she was disassembling the weapon with the focused, loving care of a watchmaker. She had a small camp stool and a portable lamp, its light creating a small island of order in the cavernous, grease-smelling darkness of the bay. Thorne stopped 20 feet away, his heart pounding. She did not look up. He knew she was aware of him. He could feel her awareness, a palpable, static hum in the air. He stood there for a full minute, then 2. He had prepared a speech, an apology full of the formal language he thought was required. But as he stood there, watching her work, the words felt cheap and useless. He watched the way her hands moved, each wipe of the carbon from the bolt carrier, each drop of oil on the trigger assembly, a prayer of professionalism. He finally understood. Words were his currency. Actions were hers. So he acted. He walked to a stack of sandbags in the corner of the bay. They were heavy, each one 100 pounds of dead weight, and they were in the wrong place, left behind by a careless work crew. Without a word, he began to move them. He heaved the first one onto his shoulder, his muscles screaming in protest after a week of exertion, and carried it to the designated storage wall on the other side of the bay. He went back and got another, and another. He worked in silence, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He was building a wall of repentance, one sandbag at a time. After he had moved the entire stack, nearly 24 bags, he was drenched in sweat, his uniform soaked through. He stood before her, not as a cadet captain, but as a penitent, and simply came to the position of attention. He said nothing. She finished her work, reassembling the rifle with a final, satisfying click. She wiped her hands on a clean rag, her movements still unhurried, still precise. She finally looked up at him, her eyes meeting his for the first time since the incident. Her gaze was not cold. It was not angry. It was analytical, like a geologist studying a rock. After a long moment, she spoke. Her voice was quiet, lower than he expected, and held no trace of malice. "Assumptions are heavy, cadet," she said. "They weigh you down. Travel light, that was all." She stood up, picked up her tool roll and the rifle, and walked past him into the darkness, leaving him alone with her words and the monument of his own labor. The next day, the cadets found that someone had taken a black marker and written on the side of the mess tent, on the wall of the corner where she had sat. It said, simply, "The Spectre's Table," the name stuck. 5 years later, Captain Marcus Thorne stood in the dust of a New Mexico desert, his uniform bleached by the sun, his face a hard, wind-carved mask. The arrogant, privileged boy was gone, burned away in the crucible of Ranger School, of deployments to places that didn't appear on the news, of leading men in situations where a single assumption could mean a casket flag. He was quiet now. He was observant. He was a good officer, one of the best of his generation, known for his calm under fire and his unnerving ability to see what others missed. He was inspecting a new platoon of lieutenants, fresh from West Point, their faces still soft, their confidence still loud. He saw himself in one of them, a lieutenant named Hayes, sharp, ambitious, and with a tongue a little too quick. Thorne watched as Hayes berated a young private for a minor error in setting up a communications antenna, his voice dripping with the same condescending sarcasm Thorne had once wielded like a weapon. Later that evening, Thorne called Hayes to his tent. "Lieutenant," he began, his voice low and even. "I'm going to tell you a story. It's not in any field manual, but it's the most important lesson you will ever learn. If you have the wisdom to listen." He told him everything. He told him about the mess tent, the MRE, the blue barrel pistol. He told him about the woman with gray in her hair and the silence that was her armor. He didn't spare himself, detailing his own arrogance, his own fear, his own utter and complete humiliation. Hayes listened, his initial bravado slowly melting away, replaced by a dawning understanding. "She never raised her voice," Thorne said, his eyes distant, seeing a ghost in the flickering lantern light. "She never had to. Her competence was her voice. Her actions were her argument. I try to build my authority on a foundation of noise and rank. She built hers on a foundation of skill so deep and so absolute that it was a force of nature. We call it the Spectre's principle now, those of us who know the story. And the principle is this: the most dangerous person in the room is never the loudest. They're the quietest. They're the observer. They're the one who doesn't need to prove anything to anyone, because their proof is woven into the very fiber of their being." He leaned forward, his eyes locking with the young lieutenant's. "You embarrassed that private today to make yourself look strong. You think that's leadership. It's not. It's a symptom of weakness. True strength doesn't need to announce itself. It just is. You want to be a leader of soldiers? Learn to see. Learn to listen to the silence. And above all, assume nothing. Because you never, ever know who you're sitting across from." Hayes was quiet for a long time. "Sir," he finally said, his voice humbled. "What happened to her?" Thorne leaned back. "No one knows. She was gone the next day. Her name, Evelyn Reed, was a ghost in the system. But she left something behind. She left the story. She left the lesson. And for some of us, he said, his hand unconsciously touching a small, smooth stone in his pocket, she left a permanent reminder to always, always travel light. The legend of Spectre, the quiet contractor who humbled a generation of future leaders, became a part of the secret curriculum of the military's elite. It was a ghost story told to new recruits in Special Operations Selection, a parable shared between seasoned NCOs over beers in distant firebases. It was a reminder that the arsenal of a true warrior is not just their weapon, but their humility, not just their physical strength, but their quiet observation. The Spectre's principle became a mental shorthand, a code for a deeper understanding of power. It was a philosophy that championed demonstrated quiet competence over the loud, superficial arrogance that so often poisoned the wells of leadership. It taught that true worth is not in the rank on your collar or the volume of your voice, but in the precision of your actions and the depth of your skill. It was a story about how respect is not a right of position, but a currency earned through 1,000 silent hours of discipline, a currency that cannot be demanded, only bestowed. Captain Thorne, and later Major Thorne, carried that lesson with him for the rest of his career. He became a legend in his own right, not for any single act of battlefield heroism, but for his uncanny ability to build teams of quiet professionals, men and women who, like him, had learned to listen more than they spoke, to observe more than they postured. He taught them to value the janitor with the steady hands, the analyst with the tired eyes, the logistics officer who never missed a detail. He taught them to see the specters hiding in plain sight all around them. The story endures because it speaks to a fundamental truth, a truth that legacy is not a monument you build to yourself. It is not a plaque on a wall or a name in a history book. True legacy is the quiet, invisible influence you have on others. It is the lesson that is passed down, the principle that is taught, the change that continues to ripple outwards long after you are gone. The woman with the gray in her hair left nothing behind but a story, but that story reshaped the souls of 1,000 soldiers. Her silence echoed louder and longer than any command ever could. Her greatest victory was not in the mess tent. It was in the heart of every soldier who heard her tale and chose to walk a quieter, more competent, more respectful path. That is the nature of the quiet professional. They do not seek the light. They do not ask for recognition. Their reward is the quiet satisfaction of a job done to a standard no one else could meet, and the knowledge that their competence, when finally and necessarily revealed, is the only validation that will ever matter. For more stories where quiet competence triumphs over loud arrogance, and where silent discipline defines true worth, subscribe to Unknown Heroine Tales.